Tonight, we'll explore the life of a young woman who stepped into a world of palaces and protocol, yet never lost her ability to reach out and touch the hands of those society had forgotten. A woman whose eyes could speak volumes across crowded rooms, whose compassion crossed borders and barriers, and whose presence transformed the ancient institution she married into. She entered public life as a shy 19-year-old, walking down the aisle of St. Paul's Cathedral while the world held its breath. In time, she would walk through minefields and hospital wards with the same grace redefining what it meant to be royal in a modern world. Her journey was never simple. She was raised in aristocratic circles, yet worked as a kindergarten teacher. She lived in palaces, but felt most at home sitting beside hospital beds. She wore priceless jewels, yet understood the value of a simple human touch. Long before she waved from balconies or graced magazine covers, she was just a girl running through the grounds of her childhood home, dreaming of love stories and happy endings. This is the story of Princess Diana. On a summer afternoon in 1961, at Park House on the Sandringham estate in Norfolk, Frances and John Spencer welcomed their third daughter into the world. They named her Diana Frances after her mother. Though they didn't know it then, this little girl would one day capture the world's imagination. The Spencer family was no ordinary family. With aristocratic lineage stretching back centuries, they moved in the same circles as the British royal family. In fact, the Spencer children often played with the young princes, Andrew and Edward, as the Spencer home sat on the vast royal estate of Sandringham. Diana's early childhood unfolded in the English countryside, where she and her siblings, Sarah, Jane, and younger brother Charles, enjoyed the privileges of aristocratic life. The Spencer home was filled with antiques and history, set amid rolling lawns where the children would play. But beneath the veneer of privilege, there were complexities. When Diana was just 6 years old, her parents' marriage dissolved. The divorce was bitter and public. Frances left the family home, and the children remained with their father. This early fracture would leave lasting impressions on young Diana, who deeply felt the absence of her mother. After the divorce, Diana's father eventually married Reine, Countess of Dartmouth. The relationship between the Spencer children and their stepmother was notoriously strained. Diana and her siblings nicknamed her Acid Reine, revealing the tensions that simmered within their blended family. Despite these personal challenges, Diana's childhood had many idyllic moments. She loved animals and kept numerous pets. She developed an early passion for dance, particularly ballet, though her eventual height of 5 feet 10 inches would later make a professional career in dance impractical. Still, music and movement remained lifelong loves. Education did not come easily to Diana. She was not academically inclined and struggled in her studies at Riddlesworth Hall, the preparatory school she attended from age 9. Later, at Westheath Girls' School in Kent, she failed her O-level examinations twice. Yet what Diana lacked in academic prowess, she made up for in other qualities: kindness, intuition, and a natural empathy that drew others to her. Even in these early years, there were glimpses of the caring woman she would become. At school, she won an award for service, recognizing her kindness to younger students and her volunteer work. She had a particular fondness for children and the elderly, spending time with both whenever possible. Diana's adolescent years coincided with her father inheriting the title of Earl Spencer upon her grandfather's death in 1975. The family moved to Althorpe House, the magnificent Spencer family estate in Northamptonshire, with its 100,000 acres of land. Diana now carried the courtesy title of Lady Diana Spencer, though titles and formality seemed to matter little to the teenager who preferred warmth and informality. After leaving Westheath, Diana briefly attended finishing school at Institut Alpin Videmenet in Switzerland. This was meant to polish her education with lessons in cooking, deportment, and languages, the skills considered essential for a young aristocratic woman. However, Diana left after just one term. Switzerland's remoteness only increased her feelings of homesickness and isolation. Returning to London, the young lady Diana Spencer moved into a flat in South Kensington, a coming-of-age gift from her mother. She shared this apartment with 3 friends, entering a brief period of independence that would prove to be one of the last times she would enjoy the anonymity of ordinary life. These were formative years for Diana as she navigated the waters between childhood and adulthood, between the aristocratic world she was born into and the wider world she was curious about. Little did she know that fate and circumstance were already aligning to place her on a path toward an extraordinary destiny, one that would take her far from the quiet corridors of Althorpe House. As Diana moved into her late teens, the question of her future became more pressing. Without strong academic credentials or a clear professional path, she sought direction. Drawing on her natural affinity for children, Diana found work as a kindergarten assistant at the Young England School in Pimlico, London. The position suited her perfectly. Each morning, Diana would arrive at the nursery school, where she would help with reading lessons, supervise art projects, and comfort children who missed their parents. Her colleagues noted her natural ease with the children, how she would kneel to speak with them at eye level, and how quickly they warmed to her gentle presence. This period represented Diana's first taste of financial independence. With her modest teacher's salary, she managed her own apartment and began developing her own sense of style. Though born into aristocracy, Diana embraced a relatively normal existence during this time. She shopped at local stores, used public transportation, and enjoyed evenings out with friends at London restaurants and theatres. Diana also worked as a nanny and a cleaner during this period, taking jobs that would have been considered unusual for someone of her social standing. She cleaned her sister's apartment and worked for an American family in London, caring for their young son. These experiences, though brief, gave her insights into lives very different from her privileged upbringing. Her circle of friends included other young women from similar backgrounds, daughters of nobility, and landed gentry who understood the peculiar constraints and expectations of their social class. Together, they navigated the London social scene of the late 1970s, attending charity events, debutante parties, and country house weekends. It was during this relatively carefree period that Diana's path began to align with that of Prince Charles, heir to the British throne. Though they had met briefly when Diana was just a child, Charles had actually dated her older sister Sarah. It wasn't until 1977 that their paths crossed again in a meaningful way. Diana was invited to Althorpe for a shooting party, where Charles was a guest. He took notice of the quiet, composed young woman who had blossomed from the child he vaguely remembered. Diana, like many young women of her generation, had followed the prince's life with interest through the media. He was the world's most eligible bachelor, 13 years her senior, and carried the weight of the monarchy's future on his shoulders. Their initial interactions were cordial but limited, yet something about Diana's unpretentious warmth appealed to the more reserved prince. Unlike many women he encountered, Diana appeared genuine, unaffected by his royal status. When they met again at a mutual friend's home in 1980, a more significant connection began to form. Charles began to invite Diana to royal events and to Balmoral, the royal family's Scottish estate, where she successfully navigated the complex social codes of the royal household. Her ease with the family, particularly with Queen Elizabeth II, was noted and approved. The royal family saw in Diana a suitable match for the prince, who at 32 was facing increasing pressure to marry and secure the royal succession. As their relationship progressed, Diana found herself thrust increasingly into the public eye. Photographers began to follow her daily movements, waiting outside her apartment and her workplace. The young teacher who had enjoyed relative anonymity suddenly found herself on the front pages of newspapers, her every outfit and expression analysed. The pressure was immense for a 20-year-old with no media training and no royal staff to guide her. Diana handled this sudden fame with remarkable composure, though those close to her noticed her growing anxiety. She continued her work at the kindergarten for as long as possible, though the presence of photographers outside the school eventually became too disruptive. Throughout this period of courtship, Diana and Charles had relatively few private dates. Their relationship evolved under the watchful eyes of the royal family, the media, and the public. They had met only 13 times before Charles proposed marriage on February 3, 1981, in the nursery at Windsor Castle. When asked later about being in love, Charles famously replied, "Whatever in love means," a comment that seemed puzzling at the time, but would later be seen as a harbinger of the challenges that lay ahead. Diana, however, accepted the proposal with what appeared to be genuine joy and optimism. The official announcement of their engagement triggered what the press called Diana fever. The people of Britain and the Commonwealth embraced this beautiful, seemingly shy young woman who was to marry their future king. In Diana, they saw the promise of youth, freshness, and relatability entering an institution often perceived as remote and tradition-bound. As wedding preparations began, Diana left her job at the school and moved from her shared apartment to Clarence House, and then to Buckingham Palace. Her independent life as a young working woman came to an abrupt end. In its place came royal protocols, security concerns, and the enormous responsibility of preparing to become the Princess of Wales. The soft-spoken kindergarten teacher was about to step onto the world stage in a role for which no education could have fully prepared her. The transformation from Lady Diana Spencer to the Princess of Wales was about to begin, setting in motion a story that would captivate the world for years to come. The 5 months between engagement and wedding were a whirlwind of preparations and adjustments. Diana moved into Clarence House and began receiving instruction in royal protocol. She had to learn the complex hierarchy of bowing and curtsying, the proper forms of address for various dignitaries, and the myriad unwritten rules that governed royal life. The engagement of Lady Diana Spencer to the Prince of Wales was announced to the world on February 24, 1981. Diana appeared before the press, wearing a blue suit that matched her engagement ring, a stunning sapphire surrounded by diamonds that she had selected from a catalogue, breaking with the tradition of custom-designed royal engagement rings. When asked why she chose it, Diana simply replied that it was the biggest one. Her unscripted candor was refreshing, offering a glimpse of the naturalness that would become her hallmark. For a young woman who had been living with roommates just weeks before, the transition was overwhelming. Palace staff noted Diana's growing isolation during this period. Prince Charles, occupied with royal duties, was often absent. The 32-year-old prince and his 20-year-old fiancée had spent remarkably little time together, and the differences in their interests, temperaments, and expectations were becoming apparent. Adding to the pressure, Diana discovered shortly before the wedding the deep friendship between Prince Charles and Camilla Parker Bowles, a married woman who had long been a fixture in his life. Though Charles insisted the relationship was now platonic, Diana sensed stronger currents beneath the surface. This revelation planted seeds of doubt that would grow in the years to come. On July 29, 1981, Diana awoke in Clarence House for the last time as Lady Diana Spencer. She dressed with the help of her sisters, placing the Spencer family tiara on her head, a statement of her own noble heritage as she entered the royal family. Nevertheless, wedding plans progressed. Diana selected the young designers David and Elizabeth Emanuel to create her wedding dress, choosing them for their romantic aesthetic. The resulting gown became one of the most famous wedding dresses in history, an ivory silk taffeta, an antique lace creation with a 25-foot train and thousands of sequins and pearls. It embodied the fairy tale narrative that the public had embraced. The ceremony was a blend of pageantry and personal touches. Diana accidentally reversed the order of Charles's names during their vows, calling him Philip Charles Arthur George instead of Charles Philip Arthur George, a small human error in an otherwise precisely choreographed event. Charles vowed to share all his worldly goods with Diana, omitting the traditional promise to endow her with them, another detail that would later be scrutinized for its symbolism. The glass coach that carried Diana and her father Earl Spencer to St. Paul's Cathedral passed through streets lined with 600,000 people. Inside the cathedral, 3,500 guests awaited, including royalty and dignitaries from around the world. An estimated 750 million people watched on television as Diana walked down the aisle on her father's arm, the epitome of youthful beauty and promise. As the newlyweds emerged from St. Paul's, they were greeted by thunderous applause, they rode to Buckingham Palace in an open landau, waving to crowds delirious with excitement. On the palace balcony, they shared a kiss that became an iconic image of the day. It appeared to be the perfect conclusion to a fairy tale romance, the handsome prince and his beautiful bride beginning their life together. Following the wedding, Charles and Diana departed for their honeymoon, which began at Broadlands, the Hampshire estate of Charles's great-uncle Lord Mountbatten, and continued with a Mediterranean cruise aboard the royal yacht Britannia. It should have been an idyllic beginning, but accounts suggest that the honeymoon revealed the fundamental differences between the couple. Charles preferred quiet pursuits like reading, painting, and philosophical discussion. Diana, still practically a teenager, craved connection, conversation, and shared experiences. She was unprepared for her husband's emotional reserve and established routines. While she had hoped marriage would bring closeness, she found herself often alone as Charles maintained his usual activities. Upon their return to England, the couple settled into apartments at Kensington Palace and Highgrove House, their country home in Gloucestershire. Diana began her official duties as the Princess of Wales, accompanying Charles on engagements and overseas tours. Their first major tour to Australia and New Zealand in 1983 was a triumph, with crowds flocking to see the beautiful young princess. Her tours in Africa and South Asia were equally poignant. In places where poverty was acute and healthcare sparse, Diana showed a rare sensitivity for local customs and suffering. She would often remove her shoes when entering homes or hospitals, kneel to speak with children, and linger longer than protocol required. Translators would later recall that patients often wept, not from awe, but because she had listened. As Diana's public profile grew, so too did her reach far beyond Britain's borders. While she was beloved at home, it was overseas that her transformation from princess to global icon truly began to take shape. In the United States, she was greeted not with the reserved admiration traditionally shown to British royals, but with a kind of cultural embrace. American audiences, captivated by her vulnerability and style, saw in Diana something familiar, part movie star, part humanitarian, and wholly human. Her 1989 solo visit to New York City was met with enormous crowds and glowing headlines. She toured Harlem Hospital and embraced children living with HIV, offering warmth in a setting that had seen far too little of it. The image of Diana cradling a sick child in her arms, unhurried, unguarded, circulated in newspapers around the world. Just 11 months after the wedding, the royal couple welcomed their first child. Prince William Arthur Philip Louis was born on June 21, 1982, at St Mary's Hospital in London. Diana insisted on giving birth in a hospital rather than at the palace, one of her early breaks with royal tradition. She was determined to be a hands-on mother, taking William on official tours rather than leaving him with nannies for extended periods, as was royal custom. Diana's presence wherever she travelled seemed to collapse the distance between status and compassion. Her title opened doors, but it was her empathy that left them ajar. In a time when global figures were often guarded and rehearsed, Diana offered something different, a woman who felt deeply and who made others feel seen in return. In many ways, this early period of their marriage established patterns that would persist. Diana connected easily with the public, her warmth and accessibility winning hearts wherever she went. Charles, though respected, did not inspire the same emotional response. The media increasingly focused on Diana, sometimes relegating the heir to the throne to the background. 2 years later, on September 15, 1984, their second son, Prince Henry Charles Albert David, known to the world as Harry, was born. Diana's devotion to her sons was evident from the beginning. She took them to school herself when possible, exposed them to ordinary experiences like fast food restaurants and amusement parks, and insisted they understand life outside palace walls. Motherhood was where Diana felt most at ease. In a life often governed by duty and expectation, time with William and Harry offered something simpler, something real. She cherished the quiet, everyday routines that rarely made the news: breakfast in pajamas, walks through Kensington Gardens, or the bedtime stories she read aloud night after night, often with exaggerated voices to make them laugh. She insisted on doing the school drop-offs herself, whenever possible. It wasn't just about being present. It was her way of reminding them, and perhaps herself, that they were a family first, not just symbols of a dynasty. She would wait in the car like any other parent, waving from the window, smiling when their faces lit up at the sight of her. Those closest to her often said that the princess was never happier than when she was with her boys. In their company, she wasn't a royal figure or global icon. She was simply mum, and that, more than any title, was the role she treasured most. Diana delighted in small adventures with her sons. She wanted them to laugh without protocol, to grow up with memories not just of state banquets and ceremonies, but of muddy boots, messy kitchens, and unguarded affection. Motherhood brought Diana profound joy and purpose. Her natural affinity for children, evident in her pre-royal work as a kindergarten teacher, blossomed in her relationship with her sons. However, by the time of Harry's birth, the strains in the Wales marriage were becoming difficult to conceal. The fairy tale that had captivated the world was revealing itself to be a more complicated human story, one of mismatched expectations, unresolved tensions, and two very different people trying to fulfill roles that perhaps neither had fully understood when they stood before the altar at St. Paul's Cathedral. The early years of Diana's royal life were a study in contrasts. To the public, she appeared as a vision of grace and beauty, the perfect princess who brought youth and vitality to an ancient institution. Palace insiders, however, observed a young woman struggling with the realities of her position and marriage. Diana embraced her public role with natural flair. She understood instinctively what the monarchy had sometimes forgotten, the power of personal connection. Where royal visits had often been formal, distant affairs, Diana introduced a tactile, emotional dimension. She would kneel to speak with children, sit beside hospital patients, and accept flowers with genuine delight. She listened to people's stories with complete attention, creating moments of authentic human connection that resonated far beyond the brief encounters themselves. Her fashion choices became a global obsession. Moving beyond the stiff, matronly styles that had characterized royal wardrobes, Diana developed a distinctive look that was both elegant and accessible. She favored British designers like Catherine Walker and Bruce Oldfield, bringing international attention to the UK fashion industry. Each outfit was carefully considered for the occasion, the audience, and the visual impact it would create in photographs. As much as Diana was transforming the public face of royalty, her private life was becoming increasingly difficult. Palace life, with its rigid protocols and hierarchies, felt suffocating to someone who valued spontaneity and emotional connection. The princess found the royal family's emotional reserve particularly challenging. Raised to keep feelings contained and to prioritize duty above personal needs, they viewed Diana's emotional expressiveness with confusion and sometimes disapproval. Diana's popularity created complications within the royal marriage. Prince Charles had spent his entire life being the center of attention as heir to the throne. Now, on public engagements, crowds would call Diana's name and strain to see her, sometimes barely noticing the prince. Headlines focused on her outfits and interactions, while his speeches and initiatives received less coverage. Though unintentional on Diana's part, this shift in public attention created tension. By the mid-1980s, both Charles and Diana had become increasingly unhappy. Charles had resumed his close relationship with Camilla Parker Bowles, while Diana, feeling abandoned and betrayed, developed bulimia nervosa, a serious eating disorder. The princess later described this illness as a cry for help, a physical manifestation of her emotional distress that went unrecognized or unaddressed by those around her. Despite these private struggles, Diana continued to fulfill her public duties with apparent ease. She accompanied Charles on overseas tours, represented the Queen at events, and became patron of numerous charities. She approached these responsibilities not as ceremonial formalities, but as opportunities to make meaningful connections and highlight important causes. Diana's approach to motherhood remained one of her most revolutionary contributions to royal life. Unlike previous royal mothers, who had largely delegated childcare to nannies and governesses, Diana was determined to be directly involved in her son's upbringing. She adjusted her schedule when possible to accommodate school events, insisted on normal experiences like standing in line at theme parks, and created a playful, affectionate home environment within Kensington Palace. William and Harry were raised with an awareness of their positions, but also with their mother's insistence that they understand life beyond palace walls. Diana took them to homeless shelters and hospitals, wanting them to develop empathy for those less fortunate. She arranged for them to receive gifts from charities rather than just expensive presents, teaching them early about the importance of giving back. As the 1980s progressed, Diana grew more confident in her royal role. She began to select causes that spoke to her personally, rather than following traditional royal patronages. Mental health, AIDS, and landmines would eventually become areas where her influence was transformative, but her evolution as a humanitarian was gradual, built on growing self-assurance and deeper understanding of how she could use her position to effect change. By 1986, Charles and Diana were leading largely separate lives, though maintaining a united public facade. The princess found solace in her charitable work and in raising her sons. She developed close friendships with people who offered emotional support, from her butler Paul Burrell to various friends outside royal circles. Diana also began working with voice coaches and image consultants, recognizing that she needed to develop skills for her public role that her limited education and training had not provided. She worked on her public speaking, gradually transforming from the shy, head-tilted shy D of early engagements to a more assured, articulate advocate for her chosen causes. What made Diana extraordinary during these difficult years was her ability to compartmentalize, to set aside private pain when engaging with the public, particularly when meeting people facing serious challenges of their own. Those who worked with her on charity engagements observed her remarkable capacity to be fully present for others despite her personal struggles. The contrast between Diana's outer poise and inner turmoil grew more pronounced as the decade wore on. By the late 1980s, the breakdown of the marriage was becoming increasingly difficult to conceal from the media and the public. Separate appearances, cool interactions at shared events, and telling absences began to tell their own story. As the fairy tale narrative that had surrounded their wedding gave way to a more complicated reality, Diana was entering a new phase of her life. No longer the shy young bride, nor simply an ornamental princess, she was beginning to define herself on her own terms. This evolution would ultimately lead her to her most impactful work and to a new identity beyond her royal title. The turning point in Diana's public identity came in April 1987, when she opened the UK's first purpose-built HIV/AIDS unit at London's Middlesex Hospital. In an era when misinformation and fear surrounded the disease, when many believed it could be transmitted through touch or breath, Diana did something revolutionary in its simplicity. She shook an AIDS patient's hand without gloves. It was not planned for publicity. There was no press conference or rehearsed statement. She simply stepped forward, extended her hand, and smiled. The patient, startled at first, looked up in disbelief. She didn't flinch, didn't recoil. She held his gaze, and in doing so, held the gaze of a world gripped by stigma. That moment became an image seen across continents, a princess in a pale blue suit, gloveless, kind-eyed, reaching across the invisible wall that fear had built. The impact was immediate and profound. As Diana later explained, HIV does not make people dangerous to know. You can shake their hands and give them a hug. Heaven knows they need it. But her involvement didn't stop there. She returned to that hospital quietly, again and again, often unannounced. She would sit by the bedsides of patients in their final days, her presence a quiet act of defiance against the isolation so many endured. She listened without rushing, asked questions without judgment, and remembered their names. One patient later recalled, "When she took my hand, I felt a surge of warmth. After she left, I noticed the nurses treating me differently, more like a person." In these silent visits, Diana wasn't performing charity. She was offering dignity, at a time when dignity was in short supply. This pattern, using her presence to destigmatize and humanize, became Diana's signature approach. With eating disorders, mental health issues, and leprosy, she brought conditions that had been hidden or feared into the light of compassionate attention. As her confidence in her humanitarian role grew, the restraints of her unhappy marriage became increasingly unbearable. By 1991, Charles and Diana's relationship had deteriorated to the point where separation seemed inevitable, though the palace continued to deny rumors of marital trouble. Everything changed in June 1992 with the publication of Andrew Morton's book, Diana, Her True Story. The explosive biography detailed Diana's unhappiness, her husband's relationship with Camilla Parker Bowles, her struggles with bulimia, and her suicide attempts. Though Diana publicly denied involvement with the book, it was later revealed that she had cooperated through intermediaries, providing recorded answers to questions. The publication effectively ended any pretense of a happy royal marriage. In December 1992, Prime Minister John Major announced to Parliament that the Prince and Princess of Wales had separated, though there were no immediate plans for divorce. The separation freed Diana to forge her own path more distinctly. She resigned from many of her ceremonial patronages, but intensified her work with a smaller number of charities, where she could make a more significant personal contribution. Her approach became more focused and substantive. During this period, Diana began to develop a more sophisticated understanding of how to use media attention strategically for her causes. She studied briefing papers before visits, met with experts, and asked thoughtful questions. Charity directors who worked with her noted her genuine interest and her ability to absorb and communicate complex information when it mattered to her. Perhaps nowhere was this more evident than in her campaign against landmines. In January 1997, Diana visited Angola with the Red Cross, walking through a partially cleared minefield in protective gear to draw attention to the indiscriminate impact of these weapons. The images were powerful, a beautiful princess in body armor and a clear visor, literally walking the dangerous path that local people faced daily. Later that year, she visited Bosnia, meeting with landmine survivors and their families. She brought not just attention, but profound empathy, sitting with victims, holding disfigured hands, and ensuring that their stories were heard. Her advocacy contributed significantly to the Ottawa Treaty banning landmines, signed by 122 countries just months after her death. Diana's personal style evolved alongside her humanitarian work. Gone were the frilly blouses and romantic silhouettes of her early royal years. In their place came a sleek, sophisticated wardrobe that projected confidence and contemporary elegance. Her fashion choices became more international, featuring designers like Versace and Chanel alongside British favourites. Her personal life remained complicated. Following the separation, both Charles and Diana gave revealing interviews about their failed marriage. Diana's 1995 interview with Martin Bashir for BBC's Panorama was particularly candid and unprecedented. She agreed to it in secret, without the knowledge of the royal family or her advisors, slipping into Kensington Palace's sitting room one evening as a quiet camera crew set up lights and microphones. She wore a simple black blazer and skirt, not to project mourning, but clarity. Her voice was calm, her posture composed, but her words cut through years of silence. She admitted to feelings of isolation, to postpartum struggles, to self-harm. She discussed her bulimia with striking honesty, not to elicit pity, but to help others feel less alone. And then, with remarkable poise, she addressed her failing marriage. "There were 3 of us in this marriage," she said, "so it was a bit crowded." The interview aired to an audience of over 20 million, in the UK alone. In living rooms across the country, people sat still, absorbing her words with a mix of empathy, shock, and admiration. It was as if Diana had opened a window in a palace, long sealed shut. The press response was immediate. Some criticised her candour, others praised her courage. But few could deny that something had shifted, not just in the monarchy, but in the public's understanding of what it meant to speak one's truth while still carrying the burdens of tradition. In just under an hour, Diana had redefined her voice, not as a wife or a royal, but as a woman with a story to tell, and the strength to tell it. The interview made her position within the royal family untenable. Shortly afterward, the Queen wrote to both Charles and Diana, advising them to divorce, which they did in August 1996. The settlement stripped Diana of her Royal Highness title, but confirmed her as Diana, Princess of Wales. She retained her apartments at Kensington Palace and received a substantial settlement, along with continued access to royal jewels and other perks. Post-divorce, Diana began cautiously exploring a life beyond the royal framework. She dated heart surgeon Hasnat Khan, in a relationship kept largely private from 1995 to 1997. Khan later described their time together as Diana's happiest period, offering her a glimpse of normal life through visits to jazz clubs, his modest apartment, and even impromptu trips to his family's home. When that relationship ended, Diana began seeing Dawdi Fayed, son of Egyptian billionaire Mohammed Al Fayed. Their relationship unfolded very publicly during the summer of 1997, with yacht holidays in the Mediterranean captured by paparazzi, whose interest in Diana had never dimmed. Throughout these personal transitions, Diana maintained her focus on humanitarian work. She auctioned many of her famous gowns at Christie's in New York in June 1997, raising $3.25 million for AIDS and cancer charities. She continued to make hospital visits, meet with homeless people, and advocate for causes close to her heart. In these years, Diana created a template for modern celebrity philanthropy that many have since followed. She understood that her presence could shine a spotlight on overlooked issues, that her touch could break down barriers, and that her voice could reach audiences that might otherwise remain disengaged. What made Diana's approach unique was her ability to combine the glamour and mystique of her princess status with genuine human warmth. She did not simply lend her name to causes or make ceremonial appearances. She connected personally, listened attentively, and used her platform to amplify voices that might otherwise go unheard. In the year following her divorce, Diana began to rediscover what it meant to live life on her own terms. Free from the formal constraints of royal duty, she embraced a quieter, more deliberate rhythm. Mornings often began with a walk through Kensington Gardens, bundled in a simple coat and sunglasses, occasionally stopping to chat with the regulars who had come to recognize her. She preferred these casual encounters to formal receptions, brief moments of normalcy in a life so often defined by spectacle. Her days were structured, but unhurried. She might spend an afternoon writing letters by hand, organizing charity events, or quietly visiting a hospital without notifying the press. She found joy in the ordinary, browsing a bookstore, making tea for a friend, or watching her favorite romantic comedies. For someone who had once lived under constant public scrutiny, these small freedoms were deeply cherished. With William and Harry, she was no longer just a mother bound by palace schedules. She was present in a way that felt immediate and real, helping with homework, attending football matches, or simply talking with them late into the evening. She often said that her proudest role was not as a princess, but as their mum. Though the media still followed her, Diana became more selective about what she shared. The spotlight had not dimmed, but she had learned how to step in and out of it with greater control. Behind closed doors, she was building a life shaped less by duty and more by intention. Quietly, steadily, and with the kind of grace that no longer needed a crown to be seen. By the summer of 1997, Diana was entering a new phase of life. At 36, she had emerged from the constraints of royal life with a clearer sense of purpose. Friends reported that she was considering a move to America, developing new charitable initiatives, and looking forward to seeing her sons grow up. She had transformed from the shy kindergarten teacher who stepped onto the world stage in 1981 to a woman of substance and influence who had redefined what it meant to be a modern humanitarian. On August 30, 1997, Diana and Dawdi arrived in Paris after spending time on the Fayed family yacht in the Mediterranean. They dined at the Ritz Hotel, owned by Dawdi's father, before deciding to travel to Dawdi's apartment near the Champs-Élysées. In an attempt to evade the paparazzi, they left from the back entrance of the hotel, with Henri Paul, the hotel's deputy head of security, driving. What happened next would shock the world. In the Pont de l'Alma tunnel, their Mercedes crashed into a pillar. Dawdi Fayed and Henri Paul died instantly. Diana, severely injured, was extracted from the wreckage and transported to a nearby hospital. Despite emergency surgery, her internal injuries were too severe. Diana, Princess of Wales, died at 4:53 a.m. on August 31, 1997. The news broke in the early hours of that Sunday morning, spreading across the globe with unprecedented speed. People who had never met Diana felt a profound sense of personal loss. In London, mourners began gathering outside Kensington Palace immediately, laying flowers that would eventually form a sea of tributes stretching hundreds of meters. The royal family, staying at Balmoral Castle in Scotland with Princes William and Harry, maintained their traditional privacy in the immediate aftermath. This approach, standard for the monarchy in times of grief, collided with the public's need for visible mourning. The contrast between the subdued response from the palace and the outpouring of public emotion created tension that would force the monarchy to reconsider its relationship with the people. 5 days after Diana's death, Queen Elizabeth addressed the nation in a live broadcast, speaking as a grandmother about the remarkable woman who had changed their lives. The address helped bridge the emotional gulf that had developed between the monarchy and the mourning public. Diana's funeral on September 6th drew one of the largest television audiences in history. The image of her young sons walking behind their mother's coffin alongside their father, grandfather and uncle remains etched in public memory, their faces solemn, their loss immeasurable. Inside Westminster Abbey, Diana's brother, Earl Spencer, delivered a passionate eulogy that captured both the essence of his sister and the complicated relationship she had with fame, the press, and the institution she had married into. He described her as the very essence of compassion, of duty, of style, of beauty, and made a pointed pledge to her sons that we, your blood family, will do all we can to continue the imaginative and loving way in which you are steering these two exceptional young men, so that their souls are not simply immersed by duty and tradition, but can sing openly as you planned. Elton John performed Candle in the Wind, rewritten for Diana with the opening line, "Goodbye England's Rose." The song would become the second best-selling single of all time. After the service, Diana's body was taken to her family home at Althorpe, where she was buried on an island in the centre of a lake, creating a peaceful sanctuary away from the public gaze that had followed her in life. In the years since her death, Diana's legacy has continued to evolve and deepen. The immediate humanitarian impact was significant. The Diana, Princess of Wales Memorial Fund, established after her death, distributed over £112 million to causes she had supported. Her work with landmines directly influenced the Ottawa Treaty banning their use, signed by 122 countries in December 1997, just months after her death. Her AIDS activism helped destigmatize the disease and changed public perception at a critical time in the epidemic. Beyond specific causes, Diana transformed expectations for public figures. Her approach, combining glamour with genuine human connection, created a template for modern celebrity philanthropy that many have since followed. She showed that fame could be leveraged for meaningful change when combined with authentic engagement. Diana's impact on the monarchy has been equally profound. Her insistence on a more emotional, accessible approach to royal duties gradually influenced the institution she had once found so cold. Today's younger royals demonstrate a transparency and personal touch that would have been unthinkable in the era Diana entered as a shy 20-year-old bride. Her greatest legacy, however, may be her sons. Prince William and Prince Harry have continued many of their mother's charitable interests while developing their own initiatives. Mental health advocacy, AIDS awareness, and support for the homeless feature prominently in their work. Both have spoken about their mother's influence on their approach to royal duties and to life itself. William once noted, "She made us feel loved, she made us feel special, and she's still doing that now by inspiring us to be better people." Harry has been equally reflective. "All I want to do is make my mother incredibly proud. That's all I've ever wanted to do." When William married Catherine Middleton in 2011, he gave her Diana's sapphire engagement ring, saying it was his way of making sure his mother didn't miss out on the day. When Harry and Meghan Markle announced their engagement in 2017, Harry mentioned that Diana would have been over the moon, jumping up and down about the news, adding that the two women would have been thick as thieves. Diana's influence extends beyond her sons to the women they chose as partners. Both Catherine and Meghan have acknowledged Diana's philanthropic legacy in their own work. The tactile, engaged approach that was once considered Diana's innovation has become the standard for the next generation of royals. In death, Diana achieved a kind of cultural immortality. Museums have exhibited her dresses, films and documentaries have explored her life, and her image remains instantly recognizable around the world. Long after her passing, Diana's presence continues to ripple through modern culture in subtle, sometimes surprising ways. Her image still graces magazine covers, her story still inspires documentaries, and her fashion sense is studied, referenced and revived by new generations. But more than aesthetics or nostalgia, it's her emotional legacy that lingers. She changed the way we view public figures, not as distant symbols, but as people capable of pain, humor, tenderness, and grace. Her willingness to speak about mental health, to show vulnerability on camera, and to openly care for society's most marginalized reshaped expectations for royals, celebrities, and philanthropists alike. In the decades since her death, many public figures from global pop stars to humanitarian leaders have cited Diana as an influence. Whether they emulate her compassion, her authenticity, or her ability to use a spotlight for good, the path she helped forge remains visible. Her story has been retold across films, novels, stage productions, and interviews. While some portrayals focus on the drama, others aim to understand the deeper layers: the girl who loved dance, the woman who craved connection, the mother who treasured quiet moments with her sons. With each retelling, we are reminded not only of who she was, but of what she represented: the quiet revolution of a human heart in a world of protocol. Even in silence, Diana's influence speaks. It hums softly through how we talk about kindness, how we understand grief, and how we honor strength that doesn't always look like power. Hers is a legacy that doesn't fade. It simply evolves, quietly threading its way into how we imagine compassion on a public stage. Her face still sells magazines decades after her passing, and her story continues to fascinate new generations who were not born when she lived. What makes Diana's legacy so enduring is its multifaceted nature. To some, she represents the triumph of emotional authenticity over rigid tradition. To others, she embodies the possibilities and perils of modern celebrity. To many who work in humanitarian fields, she remains a pioneer who used her platform to change hearts and minds on pressing social issues. Perhaps most powerfully, Diana's story resonates as a profoundly human journey. One of a young woman who entered an ancient institution, struggled within its constraints, emerged with a clearer sense of purpose, and left an indelible mark on history before her life was tragically cut short. The years have passed since that August night in Paris, yet something of Diana remains present in our collective consciousness, not just in the formal memorials, the fountains and walkways dedicated to her memory, but in less tangible ways, in how we understand the relationship between privilege and responsibility, between public roles and private humanity. When new royal weddings take place, we look for echoes of her influence. When her sons cradle their own children, we glimpse expressions that recall her own maternal tenderness. When celebrities leverage their fame for humanitarian causes, we see the path she helped to forge. Perhaps Diana's most profound gift was her willingness to be vulnerable in a position that had traditionally valued stoicism above all. She showed that strength could exist alongside sensitivity, that duty could be fulfilled with warmth, and that an ancient institution could be both preserved and transformed by the touch of authentic human connection. Her journey from Sandringham to Westminster Abbey, from kindergarten teacher to global humanitarian, from shy bride to confident advocate, reminds us of the capacity for growth and reinvention that lives within all of us. In her 36 years, she evolved from the fairy tale princess of public imagination to a woman of substance who understood both the power and the responsibility of her unique position. Long after the headlines faded and the memorial flowers were cleared away, something about Diana lingered, not just in history books or public monuments, but in quieter places, in how people offer comfort without being asked, in how kindness is shown without expecting recognition, in how someone pauses in the middle of their day to truly listen. Diana's strength was not forged in speeches or declarations. It was gentler, harder to define. It was in the hand she held at a hospital bedside, the hug she gave a frightened child, the simple act of sitting with someone who felt unseen. Her legacy wasn't carved in marble. It was carried forward in memory, in feeling, in the hearts of those who witnessed what compassion looked like in its purest form. In the years since her passing, many have stepped into public life with empathy as their compass, whether consciously or not, walking the path she helped to clear. And though the world has changed, the longing for connection she embodied remains as urgent and needed as ever. She was called a princess, but she was also a daughter, a sister, a mother, a friend, and through all those roles, she gave us the same thing: a glimpse of grace in a world that so often forgets to be gentle. Her story may have ended, but her presence lives on, not just in the grand gestures, but in the quiet moments when someone chooses love over indifference, warmth over formality, and courage over silence. There is a rhythm beneath the headlines, a quieter layer of living that rarely reaches the public eye, but it was there, steady and unhurried, shaping the spaces between the stories. There were days in her life when the sky barely seemed to shift, when the sea stayed still at the horizon, and the soft chalk hills gave off no sense of hurry. In those hours, time felt neither short nor long, just suspended, like a held breath. Diana moved through places that didn't belong to obligation. The old manors in Gloucestershire had their own kind of silence, one shaped by the scent of damp hedgerows, the thud of boots across stone floors, the slow rustle of ivy clinging to brick. She walked those gardens with her sons, pausing often, naming plants with unsure certainty, while the boys pointed at bees and kicked through leaves. She answered them easily, her voice low, never rough. Along the southern coastline, she had once leaned against a cool stone wall, watching the water stretch away into a light haze. The salt in the air clung gently to her sleeves. Behind her, gulls called to each other from the roof tiles of a grey house, their cries echoing without direction. Those coastal afternoons didn't follow a schedule. They asked nothing of her, offered no reward. That was their shape. Simple, slow, and strangely complete. There had been nights in hospital corridors, where the overhead lights buzzed faintly and shoes made no sound on the linoleum. Diana had stood there more than once, still and unnoticed. She watched people rest or struggle, sitting sometimes beside them without speaking. The atmosphere was quiet, but full. These were places that held their own weight, shaped not just by structure, but by what people carried in with them. She understood that, not through words, but through repeated presence. People used many names for her. In headlines and introductions, the titles came in full. In private, it shifted. Friends called her Diana in a voice that felt natural. Her children had names for her that no journalist would ever write down. She responded without affectation, sliding into each version of herself with familiarity. Her identity wasn't hidden. It was simply different depending on the room. There had been mornings in the kitchen when the house still held the softness of sleep. She would stand barefoot near the kettle, wearing an oversized sweater, with one cuff pushed back, pouring cereal in measured rhythm. Sometimes a boy would wander in, rubbing his eyes, and she'd reach toward him instinctively, brushing back his hair, or just resting her hand lightly on his shoulder. The day didn't begin with ceremony. It just unfolded. She once sat on a bench in Hyde Park for almost an hour, saying nothing. The trees swayed a little, enough to scatter light across the paving. A woman nearby read a paperback, turning the pages with slow, deliberate movements. Pigeons circled without any need for attention. That memory held steady. There was no event attached to it, but it remained whole. In formal settings, she wore gowns designed to hold shape in photographs. She had learned the skill of walking with poise, even when the fabric resisted. But the clothes she remembered most weren't made to impress. They were the ones she reached for instinctively. Soft denim, loose sleeves, the warmth of old slippers at the end of the day. She could fold laundry while humming a tune she hadn't planned to hum. She could run a bath for one of the boys while discussing something trivial from school. These moments had their own kind of structure. She had spent time at Balmoral in the early mornings, wrapped in the scent of wet grass and moss. Fog gathered at the tree line, thick enough to blur the shapes of distant animals. Her boots left faint tracks on the muddy path, and sometimes she stopped walking, not to think, but just to be still. The sound of breath, the creak of branches, those became the only company. There was no part of her role that prepared her for that kind of solitude. Yet she moved through it as if she had always belonged there. The motion of cars between cities created its own kind of blankness. She often sat looking through the glass, her fingers near the window, close enough to sense the chill. Outside, the trees flickered past in rhythms that didn't demand anything from her. Buildings would rise and vanish. Faces at bus stops appeared for half a second and disappeared. These hours couldn't be captured in words. That was part of their comfort. In one of the kitchens she frequented, there was a mug with a crack along the handle. It hadn't been thrown away. She used it often, not for nostalgia or symbolism, but because her hand had grown used to its shape. The tea always cooled before she finished it. A newspaper would lie folded nearby, unread. The sound of distant conversation filtered through from another room. It was in. She left notes sometimes, on hotel paper, on the backs of envelopes, in the margins of agendas. They weren't always tidy. Some carried a smudge from her thumb or ink that ran slightly from a spill. The messages were simple, reminders, thank yous, kind words she hadn't had time to say aloud. She left them without expectation. There were crowds and ceremonies and moments where every step had been rehearsed. Diana had performed each motion as expected, but her attention often drifted to the details others ignored. A frayed curtain backstage, the way someone clutched a speech too tightly, the uneven rhythm of a child's shoes tapping the floor nearby. These became her anchors. Her laughter came in many forms. There was the brief, polite sound used during long dinners or staged events, and then there was the quieter, more complete version, when something ridiculous happened in a hallway, when a child made a face mid-conversation, when a dog knocked over a vase and looked surprised by its own mess. That laughter stayed behind her eyes, even after it stopped. Music played often, even when she wasn't paying attention. Sometimes it came from another room, or from someone's cassette tape in the car. She didn't always know the words, but she moved slightly to the rhythm, tapping her fingers, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. Once, alone in a hotel, she danced briefly across the carpet, her socks slipping on the floor. No one saw. That was part of the reason it stayed with her. At events, she often held a clutch or placed her hands together with care, not as a display, more like a rhythm that helped pass the minutes. There were long stretches of standing, of waiting, of listening to speeches that blurred at the edges. She had learned how to remain present through motionless stretches of time. She looked through windows with the gaze of someone measuring light rather than distance, the way it hit the courtyard stones, the way dust moved in the air when no one passed through. She wasn't reflecting. She wasn't escaping. She was simply there, breathing through another pause in the day. She could hear her children laughing in the next room and never rise to check. The sound told her everything she needed. She'd keep folding a shirt, stirring a cup, leafing through something unimportant. The world felt stable when their voices rose and fell behind walls. The dogs moved freely, often brushing past her legs, without pause. She acknowledged them in passing, never surprised. They existed alongside her, in an ease that people rarely matched. She shared the hallway with them the same way she shared the garden, or the arm of the sofa, without needing to lead or follow. Small things caught her attention. A button missing on a coat, a note left half crumpled, a leaf stuck to someone's heel. She didn't comment, she just noticed. The way some people hum when they're thinking. These observations gathered somewhere in her, without forming conclusions. Years passed through her, each one shaped by the movements of others, institutions, voices, instructions, and yet certain hours remained untouched by that flow. A lamp switched off slowly, a curtain drawn with one hand, the shape of a shoe left briefly in wet sand. These were the spaces where time held no agenda, where her presence didn't need explanation. There is a stillness that settles across large rooms in the early evening, long after the last conversation has ended, long after footsteps have stopped echoing down the halls. The furniture waits without urgency. Lamps cast a soft amber glow that doesn't reach the corners. In these wide and empty spaces, someone might sit for a while, without speaking, without reading, without even thinking in full sentences, just breathing and watching the light change. Sometimes the curtains sway slightly, moved by something small and invisible, a shift in air pressure, perhaps, or the weight of the day finding its way back out through the seams of the house. There are rooms where the clocks tick just a little too loudly, where the wood paneling seems to absorb time rather than record it. These places don't hold memories in a sharp way, more like mist caught in the folds of fabric, lingering just beyond reach. There's a certain kind of hallway where the carpet muffles every sound, where paintings hang just above eye level, and the air always feels a few degrees too cool. The flowers in the vases are real, but they don't have much scent. The windows are large, but they rarely open. It's the sort of corridor someone might walk half awake, slippers barely making contact with the floor, passing the same side table 3 or 4 times in a week, without ever remembering what's placed on it. A bowl of fruit, maybe, or a photograph whose frame is heavier than expected. Gardens are different in the off hours, when no one is pruning or strolling or pouring drinks on the patio. The hedges stop pretending to be orderly. The petals fold in slightly, and the birds that remain become quieter, speaking in half-songs. A single chair sits at the far end of the lawn, angled slightly toward a place no one tends to go. Someone might have left it that way years ago, and no one thought to adjust it. Inside, the mirrors gather faint impressions of the day, not reflections exactly, but hints. A streak left from a hand that once reached out, a small distortion at the edges, where warmth and light met too many times. The mirrors don't tell much, they hold fragments, shapes, outlines, the memory of someone pausing before walking out of frame. There are objects that never seem to move. A stack of books left on the 3rd stair, a pair of gloves curled into themselves near the umbrella stand, a silver dish with a single paperclip inside, never used but never removed. These items accumulate gently. No one decides to place them there forever, but there they remain, week after week, part of the scenery without needing to belong. Some evenings stretch without breaking. The sky turns a deep grey blue, and the birds outside become silhouettes, sharp only for a moment before vanishing into the hedges. A fire is lit in another room, out of sight but faintly audible, the crackle drifting through the walls. Someone might have opened a book and placed it down again, not for lack of interest, but because the air felt too still for pages to turn. Shoes lined by the door don't always match. A heeled pair next to something softer, something meant for walking only short distances. One has a faint scuff on the toe, the other a small trace of soil on the heel. They tell no story, yet something in their placement gives the room a lived-in rhythm. The coat on the rack still holds the shape of a shoulder. The scarf hanging from the hook has twisted slightly in the way that cloth does when brushed by a hurried hand. Candles sit unlit on the windowsill. They have burned before. The wax tells you that, but tonight there's no reason to light them. The outside is dim, and the glass holds a soft sheen of condensation. No one is coming to the window, but still, the chair has been pulled slightly closer, as if someone considered it earlier and forgot to follow through. In the kitchen, the scent of something faintly sweet remains in the air. Not fresh, not distinct, just the afterthought of sugar and heat. A cup is half filled on the counter, steam long gone, a teaspoon rests inside, its handle tilted toward the sink. The refrigerator hums quietly, the kind of sound you stop hearing once you settle into it. At the top of the stairs, the hallway bends. It's darker up there, even during the day. Some lights don't turn on unless you press the switch just right. The walls are narrower, the doors closer together. Behind one, a drawer sticks slightly when opened. Behind another, a curtain never quite reaches the floor. These are the sorts of imperfections that only appear to someone who lives among them, and even then, only in the slow hours, when observation happens sideways. The bathtub holds a ring of water left from an earlier soak. A towel droops from the rail, folded once, not twice. The mirror above the sink has fogged and cleared again, a dozen times in a week. There are no fresh flowers here, no arranged toiletries, just the ordinary remains of daily use. A hairbrush with one missing bristle, a bottle left uncapped, a bar of soap soft at the edges. On the bedside table, a lamp with a tilted shade, a pen without its cap, a slip of paper with 3 words written sideways in hurried script. The bed is made, but loosely, One corner of the duvet is turned back, as if someone sat there for a moment without meaning to. The pillow holds the faint suggestion of someone leaning into it while lost in thought. The room doesn't offer drama, it simply receives what passes through it. Occasionally, a drawer is open to no purpose. Fingers rest on folded fabric, touch the edge of a photo, close the wood again without taking anything out. The action isn't about decision, it's something else, a kind of drifting, a small orbit around memory and motion. A hallway clock chimes too quietly to be alarming. The sound barely registers through the walls. One might hear it only because nothing else is competing. The chime is slightly off pitch, one note lingering longer than it should. It marks time, but not with any sense of demand, more like a reminder that the evening hasn't ended yet. In the garden, the night air settles over the grass in waves. The trees don't sway, they stand. The scent of damp earth rises slowly, accompanied by the soft grit of gravel shifting under no one's feet. A bench, weathered at the edges, holds a single cushion that no longer matches anything else nearby. Upstairs, a light is still on in the dressing room. The bulbs are warm, the surface below them littered with small familiar things, a necklace unclasped, a note torn in half and never thrown away, a photograph leaned against the mirror without being pinned. These are the margins of a life that doesn't ask to be understood, just witnessed, quietly, in the hours when everything slows. Somewhere in the house, long after the last conversation has settled into the walls, a small light remains on behind a partially closed door, casting a soft glow that doesn't quite reach the hallway. The air has cooled slightly, but not sharply, and the rooms begin to feel larger than they did during the day, as if stretching gently now that no one is watching. Fabrics hang a little heavier in the corners, and the wooden floors have stopped creaking altogether, holding their breath in long, uninterrupted stillness. A pair of shoes sits near the window, angled away from each other, as if removed in thought rather than in haste. Beside them, a folded cardigan rests on the edge of a chair, its sleeves slipping slightly toward the floor. The chair itself is woven, with a back that leans just a bit more than it should, the kind of furniture chosen for its familiarity rather than its style. The window nearby holds the suggestion of moonlight, though no moon can be seen, only the faint reflection of a lampshade inside, its edge blurred by the thickness of the glass. A low sound rises from somewhere far off, perhaps the hum of an old refrigerator or the shifting of wind against a pane that doesn't quite seal. It blends easily into the silence, which no longer feels empty, but softened by repetition. The same walls, the same corners, the same curtains, slowly settling after being drawn too early in the evening. Nothing changes quickly now. Even the air feels older. The table near the door has gathered a small collection of things that no longer need to be used. A set of keys resting on a lace square, a wristwatch left face down, a lipstick with its cap slightly ajar. None of these objects have been forgotten, but none of them are needed tonight. They rest in their places, without urgency. The hallway beyond stretches long and straight, ending at a narrow staircase where the carpet is slightly more worn in the middle than at the sides. Upstairs, the light is dimmer and the spaces are quieter still, the kind of quiet that wraps around furniture and disappears into the folds of drapery. A bedroom sits undisturbed, the bed neatly made except for the corner where someone once sat, leaving only a shallow impression that has not yet lifted. The pillow beside it is untouched, but the blanket bears the faint crease of a hand pressed flat, as if testing the warmth before rising again. On the bedside table, a paperback lies open, with its spine gently bowed, pages marked not by a bookmark, but by a memory of where things were left. On a nearby sill, an orchid leans slightly toward the glass, its blossoms beginning to fade, their edges curled inward in a way that feels less like withering and more like resting. Next to it, a single envelope leans against a decorative frame. The photo inside has shifted, no longer centered, as though the frame had been handled lightly and then set down without correction. The room smells faintly of something floral, though the scent is neither strong nor recent, more a trace caught in the fabric of a cushion or the collar of a jacket, no longer hanging on the hook. There's an impression of movement, slow, and without purpose, perhaps the curtain shifting in the draught, or the faintest creak from a cabinet where the door never fully latches. These sounds don't interrupt the space. They form part of it, like breaths taken in a room that no longer requires conversation. The house doesn't sleep exactly. It waits, gently folding itself into the hours when nothing more is expected. Beyond the walls, the garden is still. The grass lies damp beneath a thin layer of mist, and the trees, only half visible from the upstairs window, stand with a heavy posture of limbs weighed down by quiet weather. No birds move now. The last of them settled long ago into hedges and branches, their motion replaced by the soft drip of moisture collecting along the edges of leaves. Somewhere beyond the shrubs, a single outdoor chair remains slightly turned, its cushion damp with evening air. Inside again, a hallway mirror reflects little, just a faint outline of the far door and the edge of a lampshade glowing low. The mirror has grown cloudy at the edges, the kind of aging that happens slowly, unevenly, without being noticed. On the small shelf beneath it, a perfume bottle rests unopened, the label worn smooth where a thumb once pressed repeatedly along the side without realizing. Farther down the corridor, the linen closet remains ajar. A corner of a towel peeks out, slightly wrinkled, next to the edge of a folded bathrobe that hasn't been worn in several days. The handle of the door bears a smudge in the shape of a palm, faint and warm. The walls here are decorated with framed sketches, all hung slightly off level, as if adjusted too many times without ever being fully straightened. The clock above the staircase ticks in a pattern that no longer registers as rhythm, each movement blending into the next until it becomes less a sound and more a feeling that time is passing somewhere nearby, though not urgently. The hands move, but nothing follows. The house holds its shape in the quiet, its memory scattered across objects that no longer ask to be touched. Somewhere deep in the wardrobe, beneath layers of fabric no longer worn, a faint scent remains, the echo of a familiar cologne perhaps, or the trace of fresh air caught in cloth from long walks taken through fields or along coastal paths. It's barely there, almost imagined, yet unmistakable. When the door opens just enough to let it drift into the air, a scarf rests folded at the foot of the bed, loosely arranged, its edge brushing against the floor. The pattern is one of soft colours, faded at the seams. The edge of the rug beneath it is curled slightly, though no one trips there anymore. Nothing is hurried, no one is expected. Each object sits in the place it was last placed, forming a landscape of pauses rather than intentions.